In the kingdom of Grand Reich, within the royal palace, there exists an age-old custom, hiring royal tutors to educate the princes and prepare them for succession to the throne. The individuals chosen as tutors are the elite, exceptional talent sought from across the kingdom. The tutor entrusted by the king is named Heine. The king has 6 children, 1 princess and 5 princes. Although the heir has been decided as the eldest son, the future is unpredictable. Who knows what disaster might strike? Therefore, the king wants me to educate his younger sons, to nurture and prepare them to ascend the throne, should any unforeseen circumstances arise. The carriage carrying the royal tutor arrived at the capital. I alighted with an air of supreme confidence. I thought the king had chosen a trustworthy individual, but to my surprise, the 2 gate guards showed suspicion merely because of my height. Even though I tried to introduce myself, they insisted I was the son of the royal tutor. Fortunately, the queen appeared at that moment. Otherwise, I don't know how long those 2 young men would have continued patting my head. Afterward, she briefly introduced me to the princes. She didn't understand why the previous tutors had given up so soon. Although she found the princes very well behaved, regardless of whether they were obedient or troublesome, I was determined to complete this mission. Then she led me to the princes' chambers. The door opened. I stepped inside and introduced myself to them. The princes appeared before me perfectly, as if stepping out of a painting. One of them extended his hand in greeting and spoke very politely, but that politeness lasted only 2 sentences. That prince immediately changed his attitude, speaking arrogantly and condescendingly, showing no regard for me. His name was Leonhard, the 4th prince of the kingdom. He was handsome, certainly, but as soon as he opened his mouth, arrogance emanated from him, his ego as high as Mount Everest. I immediately gave him the nickname, Prince Everest the Arrogant. While he was boasting, another prince suddenly rushed over, scooped me up, and started playing around. This person's name is Licht, the 5th prince. I never thought a royal could be so absurd, so I called him Prince Playboy. Seeing that, the 3rd prince came to correct his younger brother and apologize to me. His name is Bruno. He asked about my education and background, but when he received the answer that I had never attended any formal schooling, he immediately turned cold. Truly an intellectual prince. The last one to be introduced was Kai, the 2nd prince, who looked quite intimidating as he greeted me with a glare, then silently left without a word. Well, at least the introductions were done. I immediately got to the main point. I wanted to interview the princes. Interviewing each one would help me gauge their abilities to arrange lessons. But the 4th prince immediately objected vehemently because he hated tutors, believing I would be like the ones before, leaving sooner or later. Bruno agreed because he believed a tutor without formal qualifications couldn't possibly teach him. Licht went with the majority, and Kai had no opinion. Now I understood why the previous tutors had quit so early. The princes had insulted them before dismissing them. But so what? I didn't care. What I wanted to know was who would be interviewed first. I had been entrusted with the important task of educating them. Therefore, giving up halfway was not an option. The 4th prince still wouldn't back down, intending to persuade his brothers to ask their father the king to dismiss me, but Licht threw a bucket of cold water on him. He was the first to agree to an interview. Bruno didn't want to argue, but he wanted to see what kind of person this tutor, specially invited by his father, was. Afterwards, Prince Kai also approached me, muttering unclear words, but it seemed like he was telling me to leave, then silently walked away. The 3 of them left, leaving only Leonhard and me. Finally, I dragged him back to my room and interviewed him right there. The 4th Prince Leonhard, 15 years old, the most handsome young man on the continent, nicknamed the Lily of the Grand Reich. His personality was described in the documents I found as modest and kind. But in reality, he was an arrogant Everest prince. The purpose of this interview was both to learn more about his personality and to assess his academic abilities. But the difficulty lay in how to get him to take the test. When I asked Leonhard why he hated teachers, he simply said he hated them like he hated carrots and bell peppers, suddenly bringing teachers into the same category as food. After a long interrogation, I finally discovered part of the reason. No tutor had ever truly cared about him. All this time, they had only cared about the king's mood. And most importantly, he hated studying, while the tutors forced him to. Therefore, tutors were no different from enemies. As a result, the only thing he learned from tutors was how to run. Sometimes running, sometimes riding a horse. Thanks to countless skipped classes, he had won many cups, especially in track and field. With this situation, I wondered if giving him a test would only make him run away. And as expected, as soon as I held up the test paper, Leonhard rolled up his pants and ran. But what was more surprising was that I could keep up with his speed. Although the main door was blocked, there was still a window. Leonhard tried to escape through it, but accidentally dropped his diary. I quickly picked it up and crawled under the chair to read it. After reading a few lines, I realized the diary was full of negative things. Even trivial matters made Leonhard fall into despair and disappointment. When I crawled out and asked him about it, Leonhard denied it outright, saying it was Licht's diary, so I gave it back to him. At that moment, Leonhard finally admitted it was his. Seizing this weakness, I immediately used it to force him to take the test. In the end, Leonhard reluctantly but seriously completed and filled in all the answers. Upon receiving the results, I told Leonhard to meet me at 4 p.m. for our first lesson, then left the room. Leonhard, still sulking and contemplating how to ask the king to dismiss me, suddenly heard the door open. He thought I had returned to coax him into attending the 4 p.m. lesson, but it turned out to be a maid bringing pastries. I had arranged for them to be delivered as a reward for him. Thus, Leonhard abandoned his intention of speaking to the king, but still hadn't accepted this tutor. Now it was the turn of the next prince, the wise Prince Bruno. The third prince, Bruno, age 16, had been praised since childhood as a prodigy with extraordinary knowledge. He could lecture on many subjects and was considered a promising young scholar. These were the details I had gathered. Entering his room, I was slightly surprised to find it filled with books of all kinds, but the important issue was how to get him to take the test. Unexpectedly, as soon as I presented it, Bruno accepted and completed it instantly in the blink of an eye. Not only that, but he also wanted to test my knowledge and abilities. Up until now, all tutors had fallen short of Bruno. If I couldn't prove myself, I would be dismissed. I thought carefully. Accepting the challenge was not a good idea, but suddenly Bruno remarked that he didn't expect a royal tutor to be so small. Every time I heard the word, small, I felt insulted. I immediately accepted the test. The first challenge Bruno proposed was a game of chess. From a game, one can see many things about their opponent. Bruno, with a 100% win rate, was extremely confident, but with just a few simple moves, I checkmated him. Bruno was stunned, unable to believe his eyes. He continued with mental calculation. He lost. Moving on to music, I could replace an entire orchestra. In gambling, he lost miserably again. Bruno began to waver and found it hard to believe. Finally, he pulled out what he was most confident about: knowledge. 100 difficult questions from various fields, randomly written in 5 languages. But before he could finish explaining, I submitted my answers, even correcting the spelling errors. The result plunged Bruno into despair. Since childhood, he had buried himself in studying to stand out, and now he was defeated by a genius, leaving him bewildered. At that moment, I noticed Bruno's research paper and asked to read it. After skimming through it, I acknowledged it and even offered advice for improvement. Seeing his hard work understood and recognized, even receiving constructive suggestions, Bruno became ecstatic, collapsed to the ground, and called me master with adoring eyes. From now on, I was the person he respected the most. It turned out Bruno's desire to test me was simply to find someone better who could teach him what he didn't know. But this master business felt a bit strange. I refused, but Bruno stubbornly insisted on calling me that. Fortunately, just then, Licht burst in, asking if I was done with the interview, and almost carried me away. If Licht hadn't shown up, I don't know how I would have escaped, so that's 2 people down. Next is Prince Licht. According to investigation reports, Licht is the 5th prince, 14 years old, a handsome boy with a cheerful personality, very close with nobles from other countries. He often sneaks into town and stands out from the crowd, especially with women. You could call him extremely extroverted. Finally, we arrived at his room. I felt a bit dizzy being carried upside down like that. Licht opened the door and introduced me to everyone. Turns out they were his girlfriends, but being mistaken for a child wasn't always bad. When Licht mentioned there was a tiny royal tutor, these girls were eager to meet me, though only briefly as I still had to interview Licht. Reluctantly, they left to give the 2 of us some privacy. After all, I wasn't the only one. Licht also had his private matters to ask. I figured it would be about my studies or my background, but what Licht was curious about were my body parts. So curious that getting only a slap to the face was fortunate. After that, I gave him the test, but Licht was unfocused and kept spouting nonsense. I told him to seriously focus, but Licht had already finished long ago. Then, Just as I was about to go interview the last prince, Licht called me back to ask a question. If it were the type of question from before, I would have refused. But Licht's question was, who really is Heine? The other tutors were all famous with grand titles, but only I was extremely mysterious about my information. At that moment, Licht's gaze became incredibly sharp and piercing, but in the next second, he returned to his usual mischievous demeanor. Licht's girlfriends poked their heads in to ask if the interview was over. Seeing us looking tense, they were told we were just discussing serious matters, so there was nothing to worry about. I scheduled to meet Licht in the main hall at 4 p.m. and left. After I walked a short distance, Licht opened the door again to watch me, and I became wary I had been too complacent with him. The 3 princes were done. Now only the second prince, Kai, remained. 17 years old, a quiet individual who rarely stood out in a crowd. After a period of brawling at the military academy, he was suspended, a figure known for his hot temper. After knocking on the door for a while with no answer, I asked a passing maid and learned that the prince was out and not in his room. I then asked her about Prince Kai, but the maid seemed unable to communicate much and knew nothing. The rumor that he was a scary person seemed to be true. The situation looked a bit dangerous, as it was only an hour until the appointment and we needed to find Prince Kai quickly. Hurrying to find him, I ran into the palace dog that had stolen a book. While chasing it, I saw someone lying on the ground. Thinking it was a murder scene in the palace, it turned out to be Prince Kai sleeping. I remembered the prince telling me to leave before. While I was thinking, Kai suddenly woke up and picked me up. It turned out he mistook me for the dog. Well, at least he considered me his new teacher, and it seemed I didn't need to be too wary of him. From the way Kai spoke, I began to doubt the information in those documents a bit. Turning back, I saw Kai glaring. It wasn't that Kai was intentionally trying to be scary, but his gaze was inherently sharp. He looked scary, but in reality, he was very gentle. The leave he said this morning actually meant he wanted to help because he said it quietly. I had misread his lip movements. While Kaya was taking a test, a little girl entered. She was the youngest princess named Adele. When Kai spoke of his sister, his expression softened. He confided in me that he cherished me because, among the tutors, I was the first one to talk to him, and he would trust me with his and his siblings' future studies. After submitting the test, he promptly fell asleep. A mature and kind person, completely different from the rumors. Rather than hearing such information, experiencing it oneself would be more accurate. I also learned a new lesson that would be useful for my royal tutoring work. In the Great Hall, I had finished grading 4 tests, with 10 minutes left until the appointment. I wondered if they would come. At this moment, Leonhard was sitting alone on the swing, thinking that if no one came, I would give up. Suddenly, Bruno ran by, saw him, and called him to go to school together. Leonhard was surprised because, at first, Bruno had strongly objected. Yet now, he respected the new tutor. However, having just had his eyes opened, Bruno had completely changed his attitude, becoming very respectful of me. The more he listened, the more annoyed Leonhard became, so he hurried away, leaving Bruno behind. It was 3 minutes until 4 o'clock. Bruno hastily pushed open the door and apologized for being late. It turned out he believed that arriving 10 minutes early to prepare was essential. I told him that arriving any time was fine, as long as he didn't call me master in front of the princes, otherwise it would be very embarrassing. The next to arrive was Prince Licht. He pushed open the door and called my name familiarly, which annoyed Bruno and made him so jealous that he became angry. While I found it normal because the prince's status was higher than mine, so addressing me like that was not a problem. However, it shouldn't be too intimate. The mere fact of how they addressed the teacher was enough to make Bruno and Licht argue fiercely. 2 minutes later, Prince Kai arrived. The other two still ignored each other and argued more and more fiercely. Only when Kai stepped between them and glared did they fall silent. After that, he loudly said they were both good boys, causing them to proactively apologize. It turned out he was the mediator between the brothers. He wanted everyone to be close to each other. Although his appearance was a bit intimidating, he was incredibly pure on the inside, making his younger brothers unable to retort. Finally, the clock struck 4, and only the 4th prince, Leonhard, was absent. Licht suggested they start studying without Leonhard, but since it was their first group study session, no one could miss it, so they postponed it to another day. Bruno couldn't stand this waste of time, so he hurried to find his younger brother. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Leonhard hiding behind it. Leonhard said he only came to witness my failure if Kai and Licht didn't show up, but unexpectedly, those two are now very close to me. The reason is quite peculiar. Licht's female friends like me, while Kai thinks the new tutor is petite, soft, and cute. Now that all four of us are present, I intend to start the study session. Seeing this, Leonhard tried to run away but was stopped by Licht. The first thing I did was return the graded tests. First was Bruno with a perfect score, then Kai with 87 points, Licht with 60, and finally Leonhard with 1 point. This shocked everyone. Bruno couldn't believe it, so he borrowed the test to review it. Perhaps the answers were filled in incorrectly. No. Perhaps he was tired. No. Perhaps it was due to lack of time. No, they all had the same amount of time. In fact, Leonhard took the longest. He only got 1 point for writing his own name correctly. This made Licht laugh uncontrollably. But even if Licht wasn't laughing, everyone was speechless at Leonhard. Fortunately, Kai was thoughtful enough to comfort him. Although his mind is a bit slow, at least his limbs are well developed. After much comforting, I suddenly declared that the scores were terrible, which made Leonhard angry and pouty, and he ran away. At that speed, no one could stop him. But the important issue now is why Leonhard hates studying so much. It turns out he hasn't just hated studying for a long time. He's also hated teachers. Back then, his first tutor was extremely strict because he couldn't learn as quickly as his brothers. That tutor focused on him, creating terrible pressure that left deep scars on Leonhard's heart. So he began to hate teachers and see them as enemies. After hearing this story, I realized I needed to act immediately to change him. I would prove I was not his enemy. Then I walked to the window, without a word, threw it open, and jumped out, even though it was the 3rd floor. The scene was very cool, but Bruno's shout of "Master!" ruined the coolness. Meanwhile, Leonhard was thinking that only by running away could he feel comfortable. Looking back, no tutor had ever caught up with him. Just then, he heard someone call, "Prince," from behind. He turned around. He was scared to death to see me standing there on horseback. It turned out my legs were too short to reach the stirrups. I was in such an embarrassing posture. I asked Leonhard if he could stop the horse so we could talk, but riding a horse like that was terrifying. Who would dare to stop? There was no other way. I jumped over, hugged Leonhard, and we both fell into a bush. People would have thought Leonhard fainted from fear, but in reality, he was just gaping in astonishment that someone riding a horse for the first time had actually caught up with him. At this moment, I finally had the time and opportunity to explain the issue from earlier. In fact, I didn't mean to criticize Leonhard. I just wanted to talk, to find the right method to teach each individual and to tell him not to be discouraged by today's test. Everyone has their own weaknesses, and only those who recognize their weaknesses can become stronger. Hearing those words, Leonhard gradually opened up and accepted this new tutor. But a more important issue now was how to get back. The road was quite long, and if I walked, it could take several hours. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, everyone was extremely worried as the tutor and the prince could not be found. Bruno, impatient, tried to go look for them himself, but was stopped by the guards. Fortunately, the two were found before dawn. Returning to the palace, I was led by a maid to the room provided for me to rest. A room that was too large for a commoner. The bed was also very large, making it difficult for me to sleep. And as I tossed and turned, I rolled straight into the gap beside the bed. In the morning, the maid came to wake me and was startled to find me not in bed, but stuck in the gap all night. When I arrived in the grand hall to begin my lessons, I was surprised to find Leonhard already there. It turned out Leonhard wanted to try and fulfill yesterday's promises by studying. While he was doing his homework, the other 3 princes arrived, and as usual, Bruno and Licht were arguing loudly. It seemed my upcoming tutoring job was going to be quite tough. Today, instead of studying at home, the group would have a hands-on experience by going into the capital to learn about the lives of commoners. Upon hearing they would be going out on the streets, Licht looked incredibly excited. He just wanted to go out and play quickly. The city's situation had been normal recently, so the trip would be safe. Hearing this, Kai and Bruno seemed reassured, but as always, trouble came from Leonhard. He refused to go down to the streets, asking why the royal family needed to understand the lives of commoners. So I had to step in, telling him a historical story from 200 years ago about a princess who ignored the lives of her people and lived in luxury, angering the people to the point where they revolted and brought her to the guillotine. There were even illustrations. Hearing this, Leonhard became frightened and agreed to come along as long as he wasn't taken to the guillotine. After that, I told everyone to meet in the courtyard at 10 o'clock. Because our identities needed to be concealed. I wanted everyone to dress in a way that they wouldn't be recognized. But after 10 o'clock, no one had appeared yet. Just then, Licht showed up first. Being used to going out, His clothes looked very fitting. Afterward, the other three came out. Fortunately, they were all dressed normally. Bruno thought they still needed to cover their faces. Luckily, Licht had the experience to warn them, otherwise, the three of them would have gone with suspicious masks. After everyone was ready to set off, their grandmother came out crying and giving them instructions as if they were going on a long journey. After walking for a while, I stopped the group in a random alley, and from there they would walk. Since this was their first time going out, everyone still felt unfamiliar, except for Licht. Bruno even brought a map to check directions. Now I'm going to start assigning tasks to each person. I turned back and saw Licht whispering something to Kai. Then the group began to stroll. Bruno clung tightly to the map, trying to memorize it and compare it with the scenery. Licht teased him for being an amateur, then volunteered to go ahead to lead the way. But the further they walked, the more confused he became. It turned out that every time Licht went out, it was his girlfriends who led the way and showed him the directions. So now he had no idea where he was going. Moreover, this place was quite crowded. This was the Ring Road, the main street of the capital, and both the theater and the city hall were located right here. Thanks to such facilities, the city has a population of about 300,000 people. Therefore, they must not get separated, especially Leonard. It seems my story really scared him. So I held his hand to prove that as long as they didn't reveal their identities, they would be safe. But while I was leading Leonhard, I saw Licht whispering something to Bruno, and when they arrived at the shopping district, I suggested we split up to shop. Kai and Bruno quickly separated to their desired locations, while Leonhard awkwardly admitted he had never gone shopping before. Seeing this, the two of them took him to a department store. Licht whispered something in front of me again. Then, upon entering the store, Leonhard looked around and picked out something he liked. His aesthetic sense was truly terrible. He chose an ugly doll and called it cute, which was completely incomprehensible. When it was time to pay, upon hearing the price of 55 cents, the boy, not knowing the denominations of money, just handed over the whole pile. So I had to teach him a lesson on the spot. Fortunately, Leonhard is royalty, otherwise he would have starved to death long ago. And fortunately, the staff they met were kind, otherwise there would be nothing left. After that, Licht said he had something to do and dragged Leonhard away. It seems the princes are plotting something. Bruno was still engrossed in the bookstore, as if he wanted to buy the whole store. I reminded him to only pick out books he truly needed. Fortunately, they met a kind shopkeeper who marked the books Bruno had chosen so he could buy them another time. After that, the two of us went to meet Prince Kai. He told us to come to the plaza, and upon arrival we were surprised to see so many pigeons perched all over him. It turned out he had spent all his money on bird food. Then Kai asked me if I wanted to feed them. As soon as I threw the food, the pigeons swarmed to eat, and then they even tried to carry me away. Fortunately, Kai pulled me back, otherwise they would have lost a tutor. Suddenly, Licht called them and pointed to a sausage stand, saying he wanted to eat. The group felt awkward about how to eat, so I demonstrated the commoner's way of eating. Despite the guidance, Bruno and Leonhard still looked stiff while Kai and Licht ate heartily. As evening approached and they were preparing to return to the palace, an unexpected incident occurred. A lazy thief snatched an old woman's purse and pushed her down. This angered the princes. However, the old woman was only concerned that her beloved grandchild was not injured. Seeing her concern for her grandchild reminded them of their own grandmother, the Empress, which ignited Leonhard's sense of justice. He intended to use his speed to chase after the thief and make him pay, but Kai stopped him. While everyone was still worrying about the old woman, Kai caught up with the thief and retrieved the purse. This made Leonhard feel ashamed. Very quickly, the thief was apprehended by the police and taken away. The old woman came to thank Kai with a bag of candy for helping her retrieve her purse. Leonhard also received a bag from her. Although he shyly said he hadn't done anything to help, his brave act of standing up for a stranger was commendable. On the way back, I asked them what they had learned, but all the answers were superficial, indicating they hadn't grasped the real lesson. What they should have seen was the smiles of the people here. Although there are bad people in a society of 300,000 people, there are 300,000 ways of life and personalities. And King Victor, their father, worked very hard to preserve those smiles. If they were to become kings in the future, they too must strive as hard as he did. Then I noticed a strange bag next to them and asked what it was, but the group hid it and refused to say, as if they hadn't fully accepted me yet. That evening, as I was taking a walk to clear my head, Leonhard suddenly carried me off somewhere. Knowing they were up to something, I poked my head out and said that no matter what it was, I wouldn't be surprised. But I was truly surprised. The princes had prepared a welcoming party for me with the gifts they had bought that day. That night, I slept soundly with the gifts I received. One night, as I was preparing my lesson for the next day, I suddenly heard a loud commotion outside. A moment later, someone knocked on the door saying that His Majesty, after half a year's absence and now returned, wished to see me and the princes. Early the next morning, I was escorted to the king's residence. For some reason, I felt restless and anxious, and this unease wasn't just mine, the princes felt it too. Although the princes greatly respected their father, they also felt immense pressure. Only Kai was eager to meet the king, for his heart was as vast as the universe, as the galaxy itself. So it was no surprise that their relationship wasn't like that of a normal father and son. After the formal royal greetings and rituals, the king suddenly burst into tears. It turned out the princes felt awkward because their father was too warm and affectionate, which made them not really want to see him much. So the legendary god of war was just like an ordinary father after all. Seeing his sons getting along well with their new tutor made him very happy. But the father role was over, and now he would speak to them as a king. After reviewing his sons' reports and test results, he pointed out each one's shortcomings. The one who bothered him the most was Leonhard. However, Leonhard himself had forgotten what had bothered his father. It was a test with a score of 1. If it continued like this, your ascension would only be a vain dream. Therefore, the king asked Leonhard to retake the test and score at least 60. Otherwise, he would lose his inheritance to the throne. Normally, everyone is equal, but this is a special case. So he assigned me the task of tutoring Leonhard privately for 3 days, after which he would be retested. This shocked Leonhard immensely. He didn't care much about becoming king, but what crushed him was disappointing his father. However, most of the fault was his, as he had dismissed all previous tutors. But now, things were different. He had a special genius tutor, not to mention his brothers were always ready to help him improve, so everyone got to work immediately. The first step was to assess his level. Surely he must know what 1 + 1 is, right? But in reality, he didn't even know the most basic calculations. This left everyone completely stunned, as if there was no hope left. They told him to think again, and he answered 11. The more Leonhard spoke, the more speechless everyone became. They told him to use his fingers to count, and thanks to that, he finally realized the answer was 2. But when trying a slightly larger addition, he froze, not knowing how to use his other hand. Kai then came up with a clever idea. Combine something Leonhard hated with something he liked. Specifically, have him learn while running. It sounds more like a punishment. Then they tried asking someone Leonhard admired to teach him that person was Bruno. But when he heard his brother lecturing, his eyes lit up and he stared intently at him, while not a single word registered in his ears. It was hopeless. Having no other choice, they resorted to a trick, having Leonhard retake the exact same test as before, so he just had to memorize the answers. But did El truly believe his brother could memorize 50 answers in order? In the end, he had to rely on me. I combined food with math problems, and Leonhard could solve them smoothly. Thus, they found a way for him to learn, though it was still extremely difficult. Time flew by, and Leonard's ability only reached 15 points, still far from the required 60 points. Could he turn the tables when the test was tomorrow? Leonhard wanted to give up, but thinking positively, if he had achieved 15 points this time, he had identified 85 errors, and he could do better next time. These words had a profound impact on Leonard, giving him new spirit. That was good, but it was time for bed. Studying should not harm health. The next morning, before the exam, he was still studying, trying to make the most of every moment. Finally, the exam time arrived. Leonhard was ready to face it alone. His 3 brothers cheered him on silently, and even I, deep in my heart, encouraged him. After the exam ended, I graded the papers immediately. The results were truly surprising. Leonhard scored 59 points. Everyone was overjoyed and congratulated him, but they forgot that the requirement was 60 points. So to keep his promise, he still lost his inheritance of the throne. However, something special always happens at the last minute. I had graded 1 item incorrectly. The paper should have received an additional point because Leonhard had correctly written the name in my unique grading style. Thus, luck still smiled upon Leonhard, and he was accepted by the king. From then on, Leonhard also truly accepted this talented tutor. He extended his hand for a handshake, and I returned it with the casual handshake that Leonhard had once used. I thought that if I shook the little prince's hand too warmly and affectionately, he would cry again. This would embarrass and anger Leonhard. That night, I went to see King Victor with a bottle of wine. It was clear they had known each other for a long time, yet they pretended to meet for the first time, saying they had only exchanged letters. This made sense, as for me to become a tutor, Victor had to agree to a condition, keeping my past a secret. If it were revealed, I would disappear without a trace. One day, while walking around town to shop, I suddenly stopped in front of a cafe. Without much thought, perhaps by fate, I walked in. The waiter who greeted me startled me. It was none other than the fifth prince, Licht, but the employee quickly denied it, claiming it was a mistake, saying he was often mistaken for the prince due to their similar appearance. His professional and serious way of speaking and working was also completely unlike the playboy personality of the fifth prince. After presenting the menu and helping Heine order, the employee went inside to inform the kitchen, but in reality, he was Prince Licht. He feared that if everyone found out, they would mock him, saying he wasn't cool at all. Not to mention a royal working as a waiter. If the king found out, he would certainly lose his claim to the throne, but oh well. He just needed to continue as usual, with a bit of acting to make me leave quickly. However, he got too into character and forgot that I was staring at him. He asked the owner if anyone else could serve me, but the cafe's rule was that once a waiter served a customer, they had to serve them from beginning to end. So Licht had no choice but to endure it for a while, thinking I would leave soon. Unexpectedly, I even took out a book to read, which was like torture for Licht. Just then, a small scuffle broke out between two young men, nearly injuring a girl sitting nearby. Fortunately, Licht intervened, saving the girl and displaying his gentlemanly demeanor. Later, acting as a mediator, he calmed the two arguing men. With a few professional gestures and words, he resolved both issues simultaneously, drawing the attention of the entire cafe. Even I had to commend him. Licht thought he had tricked me, but somehow, a letter from me fell into his hands. That was the end of it. Worse still, not only I, but also his father found out and requested a meeting. The situation was escalating. I couldn't stand by and let things go too far, so I decided to intervene. The conversation between father and son was tense. I spoke up in defense of Licht, pointing out that his actions were serious and not at all frivolous, but the reason he worked as a waiter truly stemmed from his playfulness, as girls liked being served by a handsome waiter. At first, everything was extremely difficult and chaotic. But thanks to everyone's enthusiastic help, combined with his own efforts, Licht has matured into who he is today. For this reason, he adamantly refused to quit. King Victor emphasized that, as a prince, such a job was dangerous for his safety. Hearing this, Licht became enraged, believing his father only cared about royal blood, not about him or his desires. It was the same when he was young and had a high fever. His father never visited or inquired, and now he pretended to care, acting like a good father. But what he truly cared about was the family's reputation. With that, El angrily left, convinced his father would never understand him. The cafe was his only emotional support. Just as Licht was about to return to the cafe, King Victor suddenly appeared, galloping on horseback with me, seeing his stubborn son, who refused to listen. The king intended to go straight to the owner. Licht feared his father would use their father-son relationship to force the owner to fire him. But what happened next stunned both me and Licht. Victor actually applied for a shift at the cafe. Although both Licht and I tried to stop him, the king wouldn't listen and persisted in persuading the owner. Since there were still 5 hours until closing, the owner agreed to let him try it out. This left Licht completely speechless, the king working as a waiter. Licht himself had struggled and fumbled for days to become proficient at the job, so surely his father would be fired quickly. But El forgot where he and his brothers inherited their looks from. Despite his age, Victor exuded an irresistible charm in the cafe's uniform, captivating all the ladies. I was speechless, with nothing left to say to this king. As for Licht, the manager assigned him the task of training his own father. Having just argued fiercely with him that morning, being forced to guide him now left Licht flustered and speechless, thinking there was no way Victor could become professional in just one evening. Immediately after, a female customer requested service, too perfect for practice. Victor approached, knelt on one knee before her, and spoke sweet, charming words. Who could resist that? The woman was smitten by the king with 6 children. But that was just the beginning. Many other customers also needed attention. A foreign customer asked questions that none of the staff understood, but Victor stepped in, showcasing his masterful language skills, leaving his son gaping in astonishment. It was impressive, although Licht was still proud of his lady killer reputation. However, his father here surpassed him, winning over everyone in the cafe, young or old, male or female. All were completely enchanted. Only here did Licht catch a glimpse of a new facet of his father, not as an overworked king, nor as a sentimental man who cried at the sight of his sons, but as a perfect gentleman, sociable, refined, and elegant. And likewise, Victor discovered new facets of Licht, things his son had never shown him in the palace. After his shift, all the staff, even the owner, implored Victor to stay, saying his presence made the evening more enjoyable for every customer. But instead, he pulled Licht aside to talk privately. There, he apologized for not truly understanding him. All this time, what he had been worried about was not the honor of royalty, but Licht's life and well-being. Licht, in contrast, regretted not seeing his father clearly. Even when busy with national affairs, Victor still came to check on him while he slept. Clearly, no father would not love his child. It was just that they had misunderstood how he expressed that love. Therefore, Licht decided to quit his job at the cafe. I, silent until now, finally spoke. This cafe has greatly helped improve my own work efficiency, and so I will continue to come here daily. Therefore, Victor need not worry about Licht's safety, as I will personally ensure it. Upon hearing this, Victor agreed. From then on, I no longer saw Licht as a mysterious prince, but simply as a clever and energetic boy. A few days later, I gathered the 4 princes to discuss a hypothetical scenario. I presented a situation. Suppose a jewelry store was in trouble and had to borrow money from the state. How should this problem be handled? Licht immediately replied that the state should lend them money, but his idea was immediately rejected because the law clearly stipulated that the state could not lend to individuals. Then Leonhard spoke up, suggesting they could appeal to the public for help, with everyone contributing a small amount until the sum was met. Although the idea was not entirely convincing, King Victor found it quite interesting. He even wanted to present it to the council, and so he asked Leonhard to write a detailed report for discussion. As Leonhard was praised, Bruno felt a pang of envy. Since childhood, he had always admired his father and aspired to be a king like him. However, many believed their eldest son was the one truly worthy of inheriting the throne. To provide some context, this family has 6 brothers. So far, 5 were known, and the eldest son seemed talented enough not to need a tutor. Wanting to surpass his elder brother, Bruno threw himself into his studies. But now he was jealous of Leonhard. He worried that his younger brother might also be a genius like their eldest. Seeing Bruno distressed, I approached him to talk, but Bruno just shook his head, saying there was nothing to worry about. Not wanting to push further, I shifted the conversation to Bruno's upcoming thesis presentation at a university. As it was quite a difficult topic, Bruno asked for my opinions and advice. After reviewing it, I remarked that Bruno's thesis looked like a copy of a previous presentation, lacking originality. What dissatisfied me the most were the countless spelling mistakes scattered everywhere, which I had carefully marked. I believed Bruno was burdened by something, but since he refused to talk, I chose not to force him. Finally, I gave Bruno a challenge, to write a thesis on the changes he wished to bring to the country. And if he couldn't complete a proper essay within 2 weeks, I would no longer consider him my student. That challenge became a powerful motivator, reviving Bruno's spirit. From then on, he confined himself to his room, working tirelessly on the thesis. Every time he was dissatisfied, he would discard the old draft and start a new one. Night after night, he worked until he fell asleep at his desk from exhaustion. When the day arrived, Leonhard submitted his report to their father, while Bruno gave his paper to me. Just looking at Bruno's tired face was enough to see how hard he had worked, and the results far exceeded my expectations. I felt Bruno truly deserved to be my student, and with this thesis, Bruno could present himself confidently at university. Bruno went to university and began his presentation. He didn't want to disappoint me. When it ended, he felt a little disheartened by the lack of immediate reaction, but then the audience burst into thunderous applause, greatly restoring his confidence. Someone even invited him to their school to present afterward. It was at that exact moment that Bruno's third idol appeared, the professor himself. Impressed by the presentation, he invited Bruno to dinner and offered him to give up the throne and become a scholar alongside him. Meanwhile, I waited for Bruno's return, and as I saw the carriage bringing him back, a count also appeared. This man introduced himself as Count Rosenberg, aide to the Grand Prince. Count Rosenberg informed me of Bruno's meeting that evening. Bruno, still conflicted by the professor's offer, heard him state outright that his chances of inheriting the throne were slim to none, as the eldest son was clearly the most promising. Before leaving, the professor gave Bruno a week to make his decisive answer. In his heart, Bruno remained hesitant, as he had always yearned to be a king like his father. However, when he happened to overhear Victor praising Leonhard's report, Bruno felt even more disheartened, losing all confidence. For a week, he wallowed in self-doubt, unable to decide. One day, the pain struck Bruno as he was walking a dog, or at least something that didn't quite resemble a dog. Hearing Bruno pour his heart out, I gently told him that becoming a scholar was not something to be looked down upon. I knew I had no right to decide the future for the four princes, but I still hoped Bruno would think carefully, because if not, one day, when old age and sickness befell him, he might end up bedridden, regretting the choices he made. After days of contemplation, Bruno finally found clarity and discovered his own answer. He went to meet the professor and expressed that he would attend his school, but not immediately. Bruno wanted to wait until he was truly mature and more experienced before pursuing an academic path. After all, his greatest dream was still to become a king like his father, and he would not give up that dream, no matter how slim the chances. Hearing this, the professor smiled, showing understanding and respect for Bruno's determination. He gladly accepted the answer, and even said that Bruno could visit him anytime he wished. After that, the professor left, leaving a quiet space. And at that very moment, I appeared. I looked at Bruno with deep admiration, as that unwavering determination strengthened my belief in him. I expressed my desire to stand beside Bruno, walking with him towards the goal of conquering the throne. However, the news that Bruno would not give up the throne soon reached Count Rosenberg's ears. Upon hearing this, he changed his course, deciding to eliminate me. From then on, Count Rosenberg ordered his subordinates to secretly gather information about me. One quiet night, Kai came to me for advice. Shortly after, Bruno and Leonhard also arrived one after another, each with something they wanted to ask. Seeing his three older brothers gathered, Licht couldn't stay still and followed them in. He immediately posed a completely absurd question. If one had to choose between a beautiful girl with a flat chest or a girl who wasn't very outstanding in appearance but had a full bust, who should be chosen? Hearing this, Bruno frowned and snapped that Licht should go to sleep immediately for the safety of women in the world. I, however, paid no mind to such nonsense and quickly returned to what Kai wanted to say. Kai did not hide anything, and honestly admitted that Victor had asked him to train and improve his communication skills, but he didn't know where to start. Indeed, all four princes had their own weaknesses. Licht was too unserious. Bruno still lacked confidence to be king. Leonhard had no personality issues, but was weak in arithmetic, and Kai's only obstacle lay in communication. Within the family, everything was fine, but with servants or guards, it was a different story. For instance, whenever he passed by and was greeted by guards, Kai's cold gaze made them feel as if he wanted to attack them. And when facing servants, his stern expression looked like he was scolding them for their work. Kai didn't say these things, but others easily misunderstood his face. Fearing he would alienate everyone, he often remained silent. And the more silent he became, the more frightened they grew. The next morning, I would take Kai out to practice communication. The next morning, the three princes brought Adele to. She sulked, saying she wanted to go to the zoo because the puppy at home had ruined her favorite painting. Hearing this, her three brothers felt awkward, as the zoo was quite far, and they didn't want to go through the trouble of traveling. But seeing their sister about to cry, they relented and decided to take Adele to appease her. I thought it was a good idea too, especially as the trip could be a good opportunity for Kai to practice his communication skills. The first thing I said was to practice making Kai smile. He tried to imitate it, but he was so stiff that Leonhard had to step in and do it for him. Upon arriving at the zoo, I instructed that if Kai saw an animal he found interesting, he should try to smile. But when Kai actually smiled, his face actually looked more menacing than usual, making everyone a bit uneasy. The group continued their tour. First there was the ostrich enclosure, then the bear area. Leonhard had thought bears would be as cute as teddy bears, but the reality was quite the opposite. Seeing them, Adele was frightened, and so Kai had to gently comfort his sister to reassure her. After that, the group continued to the feeding area. Everyone was surrounded by animals, except for Bruno and me, who received little attention. Meanwhile, Kai was completely surrounded by a flock of sheep, looking both pathetic and amusing. I took the opportunity to tell Kai to ask the nearby staff for more food. Kai, sweating profusely, stepped forward but dared not speak, then turned back, still unable to open his mouth. Just then Adele screamed because she was bitten by a rabbit, forcing the group to immediately take her home. After that incident, Adele made up with the puppy at home, realizing that she had overreacted and had been unreasonably angry with it. Now back to Kai. I saw that Kai needed more training, so I advised him to start by communicating with those close to him in the palace, such as the maids. Licht immediately interjected, teaching Kai a few lines he often used to flirt with girls. Although a bit ridiculous, I thought it was worth a try. So Kai gathered his courage and went to talk to two nearby maids. He confidently repeated the lines he had just learned, but his usual stern gaze still frightened them, causing them to flee in fear. Not long after, Kai spotted a maid struggling to carry a heavy tray. He immediately stepped in to help. From then on, Kai began to help many other people in the palace. However, due to his cold appearance and somewhat stiff demeanor, his kind actions were misunderstood by the guards. Feeling too tired from constantly scaring others, Kai decided to lie down on the grass to rest. Just then, a maid quietly approached, gently draped a blanket over him, and even brought him a tray of tea. However, out of embarrassment, she quickly ran away. I came over and patiently explained that Kai was actually very good at reading people, but because he was afraid of alerting others, he always avoided them. I suggested that simply saying short phrases like, "hello," or "thank you," would be considered polite, and perhaps among those people, there would be someone who truly understood his heart. Following that advice, Kai returned to his room. Just then, a maid came to change his bedsheets. Mustering all his courage, Kai shyly whispered his thanks for her devotion in helping him. To his surprise, the maid smiled, no longer fearful as before, but instead showing affection towards him. Overjoyed, Kai immediately ran to find me and his three brothers to share the good news. His face lit up in a rare sight. Victor's aide then brought Adele's framed painting. The painting had been painted by myself. I noticed a burn mark on the corner of the painting and suspected that a candle had burned it, perhaps pushed by the dog rather than the dog intentionally ruining the painting. A few days later, when Kai's communication skills had improved enough that he could flirt with girls without scaring them away, he was summoned by Victor. Accompanying me, we found Bruno already there. Victor wanted them all to discuss an incident that had just appeared in the newspaper. The article reiterated an event from the previous year when Kai and Bruno were attending military school. According to the report, both were accused of using violence to threaten teachers to get perfect scores without taking exams. Anyone who resisted would be beaten. It became a nightmare for the school, only ending when Kai was found to have seriously injured a classmate. The journalist also wrote that the entire incident had been covered up by the authorities, claiming that Kai and Bruno had actually been suspended, while the injured student suffered worse consequences of expulsion and government pressure. Hearing this, Bruno immediately protested, asserting that everything written in the newspaper was completely untrue. However, Victor calmly replied that he could not intervene because the press had freedom of speech. Nevertheless, the undeniable truth remained that Kai had indeed assaulted someone. I, silent until now, turned my gaze towards Kai and gently asked him to recount the whole truth behind the story. That was when they had just enrolled. Because Kai looked intimidating, no one dared to approach him, but he noticed Bruno often got injured, always making excuses about sword practice. One time, when Kai had waited too long, he went to look and discovered his younger brother being beaten. Unable to contain his anger, Kai beat the other boy mercilessly, resulting in his suspension, while the other boy was expelled because the school would not accept Leonard and Licht. Bruno also dropped out of school. Victor then filed a complaint with the press and would await their response. Thinking back, even the king and princes were helpless. Everything was truly chaotic. It's no wonder the four brothers now study under the tutelage of royal tutors. From then on, Kai was forced to get used to enduring gossip and slander from both inside and outside the palace. Victor instructed him to endure it silently for a while, to avoid causing further disturbance. At the same time, I happened to read another article revealing that a criminal had broken into the palace. After leaving, Kai expressed his desire to meet the student involved in the incident again in person for a confrontation. He made it clear that he was willing to endure whatever the other person wanted to do to him, and absolutely would not retaliate with violence again. Hearing this, I decided to accompany him as a mediator to ensure the meeting went smoothly. While preparing, the close servants worried about Kai but still trusted him wholeheartedly. In response, Kai forced a smile and thanked them. That smile was beautiful, but his cold, sharp eyes made anyone looking at him shiver. Bruno immediately entered, reassuring everyone that it was the best smile Kai could manage, asking for their understanding. At the meeting place, I and a soldier were assigned to go in first to complete the formalities. The student, upon hearing that Kai wanted to confront him about the article, hesitated for a moment, but then agreed to a compromise. I immediately went outside to call Kai. But just then, the soldier accompanying me was ambushed by a group of people and dragged away. When Kai and I returned, the boy calmly stated that the soldier had gone inside earlier on his own. Without a doubt, Kai and I entered, now sitting together in a three-way conversation. The student explained why he had attacked Bruno. He said there were rumors spreading through the school that royals could do whatever they pleased, always receiving favoritism. He saw Bruno consistently getting high marks while teachers focused on tutoring the siblings and largely neglected other students. Envy and resentment festered until it finally erupted into conflict. He wanted to apologize, and as Kai reached out for a handshake to mediate, he suddenly pulled out a gun and his men appeared to subdue them. I, Kai, and the remaining soldier were thrown into the cellar and tied up. This boy intended to use all three of us as hostages for ransom, daring to abduct a prince. He must have been tired of living. Since being expelled, his family had also disowned him. He wanted to take photos as proof to extort the king. However, as he took pictures, all three of us showed mockery, nonchalance, and no fear, which only further enraged him. He decided to threaten them to force them into fear. But as he turned to threaten Kai, the boy's face remained as calm as ever. However, as soon as he turned to threaten me, Kai immediately lost his temper. He exerted force to break the shackles binding him. But remembering his promise to me not to resort to violence, he stopped and tried to suppress his inner rage. Seeing Kai not resisting, the boy immediately attacked him. Instantly, I blocked the blow. I had already freed myself from those flimsy shackles a long time ago. Turning, I used that very chain to bind the boy tightly. Just when I thought everything was resolved and the three of us were about to leave, suddenly the boy's subordinates swarmed in from all directions. In that urgent situation, I turned to the soldier, asking him to protect Kai, while I myself prepared to confront them head-on. In that moment, I demonstrated my true capabilities. Not only was I excellent in knowledge and sports, but my actual combat skills were also unmatched. I moved swiftly and agilely, dodging every bullet, neutralizing every attack, not letting a single blow land on me. I single-handedly took down all the enemies. Just then, the soldier who was previously captured returned with reinforcements, but there was nothing left for them to do. Everything was handled by me. Calmly, I handed over the duty, telling them to take all the prisoners to the police station for processing. Kai still spoke up and invited the boy to the palace as a guard to start a new life, as he didn't want to treat others too harshly and wanted to give them a chance to correct their mistakes. Kai valued his knowledge and abilities, believing they would serve the country well. Hearing this, the boy felt somewhat relieved. A few days later, the article was corrected to reflect the truth. I happened to meet Count Rosenberg, who wanted to know more about my past. When I refused to answer, Count Rosenberg immediately swept me up and said he would take me to the palace. On the way, Count Rosenberg chuckled and remarked that, since my arrival, the princes had all changed for the better. But I knew very well that Count Rosenberg was behind many past events, from instigating Elle to work outside, to using professors to convince Bruno to abdicate. Only the latest incident involving Kai remained uncertain. Count Rosenberg immediately denied it, feigned no involvement, and then steered the conversation to a recent article about a criminal breaking into the palace. Before they could argue further, the carriage arrived. As I stepped down, I saw Leonhard waiting. Just as I was about to speak, Count Rosenberg interrupted, revealing that he knew my true identity and that I was once a teacher at a church. Count Rosenberg even claimed that upon digging deeper, he had uncovered an interesting secret about me. Despite this, I remained calm, gently asking Leonard to go inside first. But Leonhard would not let it go. Stirred by Count Rosenberg's words, he decided to chase after me, determined to find out the truth. Realizing Leonard was still following, I turned back to block his path and asked him directly what he wanted to know. Leonhard remained silent, not answering, then suddenly turned and ran off. I immediately gave chase, resolved not to let him leave in confusion. Leonhard wanted to know about my past teaching at the church, and I confirmed it was true that I had volunteered there. Leonhard also wanted to hand in his assignment for me to grade. Seeing Leonhard improve and no longer dislike studying, I was happy that he was growing more mature. Next was Bruno. He was teaching a few children alongside Adele. When I arrived, Bruno admitted he didn't know what to do with himself until Adele and the children asked him to teach them. That day, the children in the palace surrounded Bruno, bombarding him with personal questions. What did he usually do? Did he have a girlfriend? What was his favorite food? Faced with a barrage of questions, Bruno was silent and evasive, unwilling to reveal anything. The excited children quickly became disappointed, their faces falling with boredom. Seeing this, I reminded him that if he maintained such distance, unable to guide even a few children, how could he possibly lead a nation one day? Hearing this, Bruno nodded slightly, then gradually opened up, sharing stories and chatting warmly with the children, bringing back a lively atmosphere. Next was Kai. He hesitantly confessed his true desire to return to military school. However, he had never dared to tell his father, knowing Victor would surely refuse. Still, Kai longed to return to start over and learn to talk to others. I listened and advised that this was a challenge Kai had to overcome on his own. If he truly wanted to be king, then he first needed the courage to face Victor and convince him himself, rather than relying on me. Finally, there was Licht. I proactively went to the cafe where he was working. After observing for a while, I realized that through this job, Licht had matured, gaining a better understanding of society and the daily lives of commoners. I praised and encouraged him to continue on that path, as it was a valuable experience. Licht smiled faintly upon hearing this, but inside he felt something strange, as if my words contained a farewell. The next morning, the four brothers gathered. The topic at hand was what Leonhard had heard from Count Rosenberg about my past. All four were curious, but felt many points remained unclear. In the end, they decided to sneak into my room to verify it themselves. Thinking I wouldn't be there, they anxiously stood before the door, nodded to each other, and prepared to enter. By chance, I was carrying a stack of books for materials, so the four were able to enter directly instead of sneaking, and they were astonished by the mess in my room. Upon hearing that I was busy preparing lectures for them, the four brothers decided to clean my room for me. Bruno proposed a complex plan, but it was too convoluted, so they agreed to clean first and then sort out the details. I asked the four not to touch my personal box. The brothers thought that box might reveal the mystery, so they tried to open it, but touching it would alert me, so Leonhard asked me to scratch his back to distract me, so Licht could open it. The moment they touched, I realized. Licht said he was thirsty and asked me to get him water, but I suggested making tea right there. Leonhard asked me to get pastries, but I told them to leave it all to me. Leonhard had secretly opened the box before I could stop him. Inside were the gifts the four princes had given me, and letters from former students. Everyone loved me and wanted to be like me. I believed that all my students were precious to me, and the four princes were no exception. Each of them had their own personality, and thus great value to me. I felt honored to teach all four of them, and to punish their curiosity, I said I would prepare a lot of extra exercises. The four princes continued to help each other clean up the very messy room. Meanwhile, I asked Kai to return some books to the library. Leonhard enthusiastically volunteered to go instead, picking up a stack of books and happily running off. Just then, a maid entered, carrying a tray of hot tea and accidentally bumped into Leonhard. The collision sent them both tumbling, and the tea tray spilled, causing a chain reaction that made the already messy room even worse. Seeing this, I intended to help, but the four princes insisted on doing it themselves and blocked me, saying they would handle it this time. They pushed me back to my desk while they patiently cleaned up. Many hours passed until evening, and after much effort, the room was finally tidy. Then I smiled and said I had prepared a lot of homework as a small gift for them. Just kidding. I had also brought tea and pastries as a small reward. During their break, they happened upon an old newspaper that I had kept. The article reported that a criminal had once snuck into the palace. Immediately, all four of them burst into laughter, dismissing it as nonsense. If a criminal could enter the palace, where else could he hide? I simply shook my head and slowly reminded them not to believe anything without solid evidence. Then, half jokingly, I looked at them and said, "What if the criminal in that article was actually me?" All four of them thought it was absurd and that I was joking. There was no way I could be a criminal. The next day, I used the newspaper story as an assignment for the four princes. I sternly warned that such news should never be taken lightly, because if one day they became kings and ignored such rumors, they could inadvertently plunge the entire country into danger. The task I assigned was for each of the four to go into the city or use their own methods to investigate the incident reported in the newspaper. Kai was the first to speak up. He wanted to meet the person who wrote the article directly. However, upon closer inspection, the newspaper did not clearly state the author's name. Nevertheless, Kai managed to find out the identity of the person who edited the manuscript. Therefore, he decided to meet that person to ask for more information. By the end of the day, he returned with an important piece of information. The original author had resigned immediately after completing that article, and currently, no one knew where he was. Licht remained dismissive, believing this matter was not worth their attention. Conversely, Bruno found it extremely suspicious, so he insisted that they must find the author. The next day, all four brothers searched everywhere, asking questions in many places, but still found no results. Unexpectedly, Licht himself discovered a clue. Excitedly, he revealed that the author had changed his name and occasionally appeared in the city's Grand Hall. Wasting no time, all four of them went there and lay in wait until he left. They quickly blocked his path and apprehended him, under intense threats that if he did not tell the truth, he would be executed. The man was forced to confess. He admitted that he only received an invitation from a mysterious figure. Due to the dim light, he couldn't see the person's face clearly, only remembering that the stranger asked him to write an article implying that before King Victor ascended the throne, a criminal had appeared at the Harvest Festival, and now that criminal had sneaked into the palace. When he went to investigate, he found no information. Therefore, he suspected it was fake news. The four brothers entered the palace archives and found records of criminals at the Harvest Festival. And then Bruno accidentally discovered my name. I was arrested for kidnapping and attempted assassination of a prince. The incident happened before Victor ascended the throne, and that prince was a young Victor. Unwilling to accept the truth, the four brothers sat down to discuss it again. By this point, they were almost certain that the criminal mentioned in the article was none other than me. They recalled that from beginning to end, I was always the one assigning them tasks, always warning them to investigate, but never putting myself in danger. Upon reflection, it was no different than a hint. The person they were looking for was actually me, because I would never put my beloved students in danger. However, they still couldn't understand why their teacher would do such a thing. The four immediately rushed to find me to demand answers, but when they reached my room, I was not there. Still confused, they discovered that Victor had returned to the palace. The four decided to meet their father to ask for the truth. However, when confronted, Victor remained resolutely silent, unwilling to break his promise from years ago. Just as the atmosphere became tense, Victor's assistant suddenly arrived with a letter I had left behind. Only then did Victor finally open his mouth and begin to tell his four sons the long-hidden truth. He recounted that in his youth, he often snuck out of the city to observe the daily lives of the people. During one such trip, he had his pocket watch stolen by a thief. Following the trail of pursuit, Victor encountered a small, skinny boy, and it was a fateful meeting. I ordered the two children to return the stolen item to Victor. I wanted Victor to go home, but instead, he followed me to where the orphans were. I took responsibility for leading the group and forbade them from committing crimes. Seeing Victor hungry, I gave him an apple, but Victor only took a bite and passed it to a little girl nearby. In the following days, Victor continuously sneaked out of the palace to help me. He taught me how to earn money to care for the children. Witnessing this reality, Victor vowed to change the country when he ascended the throne. I gradually became Victor's only friend and the only one he could confide in. At that time, the Harvest Festival was approaching, and wanting to help, Victor gave me his precious gold pocket watch in exchange for a cheap bottle of wine as a way to provide me with funds to care for the orphans under his protection. A few days later, the palace suddenly discovered Victor was missing. The entire court immediately panicked, assuming the future king had been kidnapped, and immediately deployed soldiers everywhere to search. Meanwhile, Victor and I were accidentally discovered. The soldiers, upon seeing them, misunderstood and assumed I was the kidnapper, so they pursued us. During the pursuit, Victor's gold pocket watch fell to the ground. That scene only further solidified the soldiers' belief that I was the culprit who had kidnapped the prince. They all drew their guns, firing warning shots to force me to stop. However, in that very moment of danger, Victor lunged forward, shielding me with his body. Forced into collective punishment, the soldiers, unwilling to take responsibility, fabricated that I was using Victor as a human shield to escape. That slander ignited my rage, and I fought back fiercely. It was only when Victor shouted that I finally hesitated, and immediately after, I was tied up and dragged into prison. During my days in prison, I harbored no resentment nor attempted to justify myself. I only prayed silently, wishing Victor to be safe and return to the palace peacefully. Later, when Victor recovered, he personally came to the dungeons to free me. As the truth came to light, Victor explained everything to his father, and I was completely exonerated. A year later, after Victor officially ascended the throne, as a gesture of gratitude, he had a church built where I could teach. From an orphaned, once illiterate boy, I grew to become a respected teacher, admired by all, as I am now. Nevertheless, a secret pact exists between Victor and me. They decided never to reveal the truth of that year, for they knew it would only cause unnecessary controversy, and if the day the truth had to be exposed, I would leave the palace. Now that moment has come. I quietly left the palace and resigned as the royal tutor. I did not want the people to know that the future princes of the kingdom were taught by someone who was once a criminal. That is why I chose to leave, to preserve the honor of the royal family, as well as my own. Tomorrow will be the last lesson. Therefore, Victor instructed his sons to prepare thoroughly. That night, all 4 princes tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The next morning, they all went to the classroom where I was waiting. Upon meeting me, the 4 recounted that Victor had cleared up the long-standing misunderstanding. However, I did not want them to view the matter purely through emotions. I sternly reminded them to try and put themselves in the shoes of a king and consider what they would do if a criminal truly sneaked into the palace. Listen, upon hearing this, L was the first to respond. He did not hesitate, stating directly that he would certainly expel the criminal. I nodded slightly, then further explained that my purpose in taking on the role of tutor was to train all 4 of them to become worthy kings. A true king must never let emotions cloud his judgment when making decisions. Afterward, I turned to assess each of them individually. With Leonhard, I acknowledged that although he was sometimes foolish, his strength lay in his ability to recognize his own shortcomings. Furthermore, Leonhard possessed imagination and exceptional capabilities, traits that would help him become a good king in the future. As for L, I said he was humble, treated everyone equally, and always knew how to listen. If L were to ascend to the throne one day, the country would become a place where no one suffered from discrimination or prejudice. Next was Bruno, a man of profound knowledge who never neglected his studies and could impart his knowledge to others with sound judgment and decision-making abilities. When he became king, he would bring forth a just nation. Finally, there was Kai, a person with a compassionate heart and the strength to overcome adversity. If he became king, he would use that strength to bring peace to all. And so, the final lesson concluded. That afternoon, I officially departed the palace. By evening, Victor entered the room to meet his 4 sons. He immediately noticed that each of them carried a heavy heart, none of them happy about their tutor's departure. Victor sighed softly, then announced that a new tutor, nominated by Count Rosenberg, would soon arrive to replace me. He merely hoped the 4 princes could get along with the newcomer and continue their studies. However, all 4 immediately protested. In their eyes, no one but me was worthy of that role. Therefore, upon learning that the council had not yet made a final decision regarding the appointment, they collectively discussed and resolved to present their opinions before the council. Their goal was not only to protect me, but also to prove that I was indeed the perfect choice for the royal tutor position. They understood clearly that a royal tutor was not merely someone who taught letters and knowledge, but also someone who guided the princes step by step to grow worthy of the throne. Therefore, if all 4 of them could prove to the council that they had truly changed, matured, and progressed under my guidance, then the council would have to acknowledge it and agree to let me stay. Together, they prepared a presentation persuasive enough to win the council's support. Victor was also pleased that his sons had made such an effort. Meanwhile, I had returned to the church. Victor came to see me, greeted me, and informed me that there would be a meeting this afternoon to select a new tutor, and that the 4 princes were plotting something. I wanted Victor to stop them so they wouldn't do anything foolish, but Victor refused, saying that if I wished, I could attend the meeting and see for myself. At that moment, Count Rosenberg stood up to nominate another candidate for the tutor position. The person quickly gained support from many council members, and they even considered appointing him on the spot. However, unexpectedly, the 4 princes appeared. According to the law, they did not have the right to directly nominate a teacher. They could only recommend someone. The final decision still rested with the council. Even so, they remained firm in expressing their wishes. They wanted me back. Count Rosenberg immediately countered, exposing my dark past, claiming I was once a criminal, and also pointing out that I had no official qualifications. This only further increased the discontent among many council members. However, the 4 princes were undeterred. One by one, they rebutted, asserting that everyone made mistakes in the past, but what truly mattered was how they picked themselves up and changed. They emphasized that this time, they were no longer thinking like naive children, but as heirs to the throne. That was why they did not want a wrong decision today to lead to severe consequences for the kingdom in the future. Finally, all four of them reiterated my final lesson that a king must never let emotions overwhelm reason and must always strive to build a strong nation. They declared that it was only thanks to me that they truly understood and realized this, and only I was qualified to lead them down the right path to becoming worthy kings. Their speech was praised and met with applause from the crown prince. From high above, I heard every word of the four princes, and I couldn't help but be moved. All that I had sown over the years had finally borne fruit. The once green four disciples could now stand before the council and speak with the demeanor of true heirs. As the session was temporarily adjourned, Victor stepped outside and unexpectedly met his eldest son, along with Count Rosenberg. The crown prince could not hide his astonishment at how quickly his brothers had matured. At that moment, Victor was summoned back to participate in the vote. Before leaving, the crown prince spoke plainly, forbidding Count Rosenberg from further interference. He wished to compete fairly with his brothers, not relying on Count Rosenberg's machinations. The next day, the final decision was announced. The royal tutors entered the familiar classroom. Upon seeing it was me, the four princes immediately stood up, their faces beaming and cheered in welcome. They were overjoyed to greet their teacher,